Hello, in this video I will show you how I created this deer themed art using watercolors and masking fluid. First, I stretched my watercolor paper by soaking it in a tub of water. I drew the deer outlines onto the paper prior to soaking it. After the paper is saturated, I place it onto a piece of gator board. Then I staple along each edge so the paper will not curl or buckle as it dries. Now I need to allow the soaked paper to dry overnight. Once the paper is dry, I remove it from the gator board so I can trace my sketch using my light box and masking fluid. The first step is tracing the deer shapes onto contact paper, which will act like a mask. And then I cut out each of the deer shapes. Here you can see the deer that I cut out in the contact paper. The deer cutouts are now attached to the watercolor paper with an outline of masking fluid. I'm lining up my deer design sketch to the back side of the paper. I place a piece of wax paper on top of the masked deer to protect them as I work. The masking fluid is slightly sticky when it's dry, so it also helps my arms from getting sticky. I use a fine line detail brush to apply the masking fluid. As I work, I use a bowl with soapy water to help protect the brush bristles. Masking fluid can damage brushes, so most artists have a designated cheap brush to use. I thrive on detailed work, so this part of the process was very relaxing. After all of the details are painted, I allow the masking fluid to dry. Now I can begin to create a flat wash using French ultramarine watercolor. I made sure that I had plenty of the blue paint ready in a small square dish. Achieving a successful flat wash is one of the most challenging watercolor techniques to master. I decided to give this piece 3 flat wash coats to try and get an even wash of color. I felt a little bit rusty with using this technique. By the 3rd time, I felt like I was getting the hang of it again. This is always a satisfying part to experience, the removal of the masking fluid. I use a rubber cement eraser to remove the masking fluid. Now you can see all of the fine details that I painted in earlier. I just love watching this. It's exciting to see all of those details come to life and pop off the background of the blue paint. I was inspired to create this piece after visiting the European Village at the Milwaukee Public Museum. I was intrigued by all of the wonderful folk art painted within the exhibit. How do you like my interpretation of folk art? Let me know in the comments. I enjoy hearing from you, so please let me know what you think. It's time to remove the contact paper deer cutouts. Now you can see the deer silhouette on the watercolor paper. Maybe I will save those deer cutouts for another project in the future. There's masking fluid to remove along the edges of the deer. As I removed the masked areas, I noticed that there were spots that looked a little jagged and bumpy. I'll touch up those spots with a bit of paint, which I will show you next. Here I'm looking over my piece to find spots that I need to touch up with paint. There's a little spot there, and then some bumpy areas along the edges of the deer. There's just a few minor touch-ups, nothing too major. Let's begin. Now I'm using a small paintbrush just to carefully get those little bumps and make the edges a little more smooth. I find this process very meditative, and I really enjoy it. All this little detail, yeah, it's my cup of tea, I guess you'd say. One last time, to use my original sketch as a guide, I place it on the back of the watercolor paper so I can paint the designs on the bodies of each of the deer. I try to line up my original sketch as close as I can to the deer on the watercolor paper. Then I use some washi tape to attach it to the paper. And I later found out that the washi tape wasn't quite strong enough, so then I used some yellow frog tape eventually. Yes, it's time for adding more details, my favorite part. I'm using a small brush to add the designs onto the deer. As I was using the paintbrush, I noticed that I needed an even finer tip for some of the details. So what I ended up using is a dip pen, which you will see coming up. Here I'm using the dip pen dipped into the watercolor paint, which enabled me to get very fine details of lines and little tiny dots. This is one of my favorite types of artwork to create. Details and more details, please. There's just a little bit left to do. I'll let you watch this and be back in a minute or two. A sense of accomplishment. The piece is all done, complete with the staple marked edges trimmed off. I'll talk to you later. Thank you for watching.